The knife trembled in her hand as she stared at the blood-stained note on the kitchen counter. The words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, "You shouldn't have come back." Before she could process what it meant, the door behind her creaked open, and footsteps echoed through the darkened hallway. Clara froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Her mind raced with questions. Who was here? Why had she been warned not to return? And most importantly, what did any of this have to do with Emily? Clara Harper wasn't someone who scared easily. Life had hardened her over the years. Divorce papers signed, bank accounts emptied, friendships strained to breaking points. But standing there in the dim light of the old house, she felt a chill that went beyond logic or reason. This wasn't just fear, it was something primal, an instinct telling her to run, yet she couldn't move. Something about the note pulled her deeper into the mystery, like a moth drawn to flame despite knowing it would burn. The house itself seemed alive, its walls breathing faintly as if holding secrets too heavy to bear. It was exactly how she remembered it from childhood. Creaky floorboards, peeling wallpaper, and shadows that stretched unnaturally long even in daylight. But now, the familiar discomfort of the place was amplified by the eerie symbols carved into the wooden beams near the ceiling. She hadn't noticed them earlier when she arrived, too preoccupied with unpacking boxes and trying to make sense of why she'd come back after all these years. Now, they loomed over her like warnings etched in stone. She turned slowly toward the sound of the footsteps, gripping the knife tighter. The air smelled musty, tinged with mildew and something metallic, blood perhaps. Her pulse quickened as the steps grew closer. Whoever it was knew where to step to avoid the loudest creaks, which meant they were either very careful or very familiar with the layout of the house. Neither possibility comforted her. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer came, only silence punctuated by another soft creak. Then, suddenly, the noise stopped altogether. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen for anything. A whisper, a shuffle, anything that might give away the intruder's location. Nothing. Just the oppressive weight of the house pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed violently against the countertop, startling her. She glanced at it briefly before deciding against picking it up. Whoever or whatever was in the house with her took priority. Still, the buzzing persisted, urgent and relentless. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, she grabbed the device with her free hand and unlocked the screen. 3 new notifications blinked back at her, each more unsettling than the last. The first message read, "They're watching you." The second, "Don't trust anyone, not even Lila." And the third, "She didn't leave, she was taken." Clara's stomach churned. Taken? What did that mean? Was this some kind of sick joke? Or worse, was it true? She thought about calling Detective Mark Ellis, the man who had worked tirelessly on Emily's case 10 years ago without finding answers. He'd always told her to reach out if she found anything new. But now, doubt crept in. If someone was truly watching her, involving the police might put her in even greater danger. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that slammed shut the window above the sink. The noise made her jump, and she spun around just in time to see movement out of the corner of her eye. Someone, or something, darted past the doorway leading to the living room. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she tightened her grip on the knife and followed cautiously. The living room was darker than the kitchen, the moonlight filtering weakly through tattered curtains. Shadows danced across the furniture, making it hard to distinguish between real threats and tricks of the light. Clara scanned the space, her eyes landing on the fireplace mantel where a collection of family photos once stood. Now only dust remained, along with a single object placed conspicuously in the center, a small wooden box. Heart racing, she approached the mantel and picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked, its surface rough with age. Inside, she found A bundle of old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon. Her hands shook as she examined the items. One photo showed her and Emily as children, smiling brightly in front of the house. Another depicted their parents, long since passed away. But it was the newspaper clippings that caught her attention. They were all related to Emily's disappearance. Each article recounted the same story: how Emily Harper vanished without a trace during Halloween night a decade ago. How search parties combed the woods surrounding the property but found nothing. How rumors swirled about foul play, though no evidence ever surfaced. Clara had read these articles countless times before, but seeing them again now felt different, as if the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to shift into place. As she sifted through the contents of the box, her phone buzzed again. Reluctantly, she checked the screen and saw a voicemail notification. With shaking fingers, she pressed play and held the device to her ear. At first, there was only static, then a faint rustling sound. Finally, a voice emerged, soft, quivering, and unmistakably familiar. "Clara," it whispered urgently. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone, but not dead. Follow the map. Trust no one. Emily." It was Emily's voice. Clara's knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the dusty carpet, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Her sister's words replayed in her mind over and over, each repetition sending fresh waves of shock and disbelief coursing through her body. Gone, but not dead. What did that mean? And what map was she talking about? Desperate for answers, Clara rifled through the box again, until she found what she was looking for, tucked beneath the photographs. A crude, hand-drawn map marked with 3 locations. Each point was labeled with dates corresponding to infamous Halloween nights in Salem's history, the same nights linked to local legends of disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Beneath the map, written in tiny, cramped handwriting, were instructions: start at the crossroads, midnight, alone. Before she could fully process what she was looking at, headlights flashed through the living room window, illuminating the space in harsh white light. A car had pulled up outside. Clara's heart leapt into her throat as she scrambled to her feet, clutching the map and shoving the box back onto the mantel. She ducked behind the couch, her breath coming in shallow. Gasps as the front door slammed open. Footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide anymore. Clara gripped the knife tightly, her knuckles white, and prepared herself for whatever or whoever was about to confront her. Detective Mark Ellis sat in his car outside the Harper residence, staring at the dilapidated structure through the windshield. His gut told him something was off. He'd received an anonymous tip-off earlier that evening, claiming unusual activity had been spotted inside the house. Given the circumstances, he couldn't ignore it, especially since the Harper case had never truly left his mind. 10 years later, and he still woke up some nights, haunted by the image of Emily's smiling face staring back at him from missing persons posters. He stepped out of the vehicle, flashlight in hand, and approached the house cautiously. The fog rolled thick across the ground, muffling the sound of his boots crunching against gravel. As he reached the porch, he noticed the front door slightly ajar. Pushing it open wider, he called out, "Hello! Is anyone here?" No response, just the eerie silence of the house greeting him. Stepping inside, he swept the beam of his flashlight across the room, revealing signs of recent habitation. Boxes stacked haphazardly, a half-empty glass of water on the counter, and blood. Dried streaks of it smeared across the floor near the kitchen. Ellis frowned, his instincts kicking into high gear. Blood meant trouble, and trouble meant someone might be in danger. He moved deeper into the house, his senses on high alert. In the living room, he spotted the open wooden box on the mantel and examined its contents. Photographs, clippings, and a strange map lay scattered inside. Something about the map caught his eye. It bore markings that matched descriptions he'd heard during his investigation years ago. Could it be connected to Emily's disappearance? Suddenly, a noise from upstairs startled him. Footsteps, faint but deliberate. Drawing his gun, he ascended the staircase, his movements measured and silent. Reaching the top, he paused, listening intently. The sound led him to a closed door at the end of the hallway. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open and shone his flashlight inside. The room was empty, save for a figure standing by the window, silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon. Clara. She turned slowly to face him, her expression a mix of relief and terror. "Detective," she whispered hoarsely, "you need to see this." Ellis holstered his weapon and approached her, noticing the map clutched in her trembling hands. "What is this, Clara?" he asked gently. "What's going on?" She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "It's Emily," she said finally. "She's alive, and she needs my help." Meanwhile, miles away, Lila Monroe paced nervously in her apartment, glancing repeatedly at her phone. She'd sent those messages to Clara, hoping to warn her without revealing too much. But now, guilt gnawed at her insides. She should have told Clara everything years ago, but fear had kept her silent. Fear of what would happen if the truth came out. Lila sank onto her couch, burying her face in her hands. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, Clara would find her, and when she did, there would be no turning back. Back at the house, Clara and Ellis exchanged uneasy glances. They both knew they were stepping into dangerous territory, but neither could resist the pull of the mystery. Together, they studied the map, tracing the route with their fingers. The first location, the crossroads, was marked clearly, along, with a note scribbled beside it, "Beware the Watcher." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellis shook his head grimly. "I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough." As they prepared to leave the house, Clara's phone buzzed once more. Another message appeared on the screen. "Midnight approaches. Are you ready to face your sins?" Clara swallowed hard, her resolve wavering. Whatever awaited them at the crossroads, she knew one thing for certain: it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be safe. But she had no choice. For Emily, she would face whatever horrors lay ahead. The clock struck 11, as Clara and Detective Ellis stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness that seemed to swallow the world whole. The crossroads loomed ahead, marked by an ancient oak tree whose gnarled branches twisted skyward like skeletal fingers. A faint mist curled around their feet, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Clara clutched the map tightly, in one hand, her other gripping a flashlight that cast weak beams against the oppressive shadows. Ellis broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "You sure about this, Clara? We don't know what or who we're walking into." She nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed her outward confidence. "I have to do this, if there's even a chance Emily's alive." Her voice trailed, off choked by emotion. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ellis understood. He'd spent years chasing leads on Emily's disappearance, only to hit dead end after dead end. Now, standing here on the precipice of answers, or perhaps something far worse, he felt the same mix of dread and determination that Clara radiated. They stepped forward together, boots crunching softly over fallen leaves. The air grew colder with each step, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual rustling of animals or whisper of wind through the trees. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for whatever was about to unfold. Reaching the crossroads, they found themselves standing beneath the massive oak tree. Its trunk bore deep carvings, symbols similar to those Clara had discovered earlier in the house. They glowed faintly under the moonlight, pulsating with an eerie luminescence that made Clara's skin crawl. She ran her fingers over the markings, feeling the grooves etched into the bark. Something about them felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Look," Ellis said suddenly, pointing toward the base of the tree. There, nestled among the roots, was a small wooden chest, partially buried in dirt and moss. Clara knelt down and brushed away the debris covering it, revealing intricate carvings along its surface. With some effort, she pried open the lid, gasping at what she found inside. It was another journal, much like the one she'd discovered earlier, but this one belonged to someone else. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, some written in ink, others scratched out with what looked like blood. At the top of the first page, a name was scrawled, Lila Monroe. Clara's heart sank. Lila? What did any of this have to do with her best friend? Flipping through the entries, she began piecing together fragments of a story that painted a disturbing picture. Lila hadn't just been present during Emily's disappearance. She'd been involved, deeply involved. One entry caught her eye. October 31st, 10 years ago. I thought we could protect her. I thought we could keep her safe from them. But they came anyway. And now Emily's gone. Clara will never forgive me if she finds out what I did. Maybe it's better if she doesn't. Better for all of us. Clara's hands shook as she read the words aloud to Ellis. "What does she mean, they came?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Who are they?" Ellis frowned, his brow furrowing. "Whatever it is, it's bigger than just your sister's disappearance. This isn't random. Someone or something is orchestrating all of this." Before either of them could process the implications further, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. Both spun around, flashlights scanning. The trees. Nothing moved, yet the tension in the air thickened. Another sound followed, a low, guttural growl that sent chills racing down their spines. "Stay close," Ellis instructed, drawing his gun. Clara nodded, clutching the journal tightly to her chest as they backed toward the center of the crossroads. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from multiple directions. Shadows darted between the trees, too quick to make out clearly. Whatever was coming for them, it wasn't human. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness. A man cloaked in tattered robes, his face obscured by a hood. In one hand, he held a lantern that emitted a sickly green light. In the other, a dagger gleaming wickedly in the moonlight. Behind him, more figures appeared, forming a loose circle around Clara and Ellis. "Leave now," the robed man intoned, his voice hollow and echoing as though spoken from a great distance. "This place is not meant for you." Clara took a step. Forward, defiance sparking in her eyes despite her fear. "Tell me where my sister is," she demanded, her voice trembling but firm. "If you know anything, you should not have come back," the man interrupted, raising the dagger. His tone carried an ominous weight, as if pronouncing a death sentence. "Your sins cannot be undone." Ellis raised his gun, aiming it squarely at the man. "Back off," he ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. "We're leaving with answers." For a moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Then, with a suddenness that left them reeling, the man lunged forward, his dagger slicing through the air, mere inches from Clara's face. She stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. Ellis fired a shot, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off the man's lantern. The robed figures advanced, their movements unnervingly synchronized. "We can't fight." "Them!" Clara shouted, scrambling to her feet. "Run!" Ellis hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding sharply. Together, they bolted into the forest, weaving between trees and ducking under low-hanging branches. Behind them, the robed figures gave chase, their lanterns casting ghostly green halos that illuminated the night. Clara clutched the journal, tighter, unwilling to let go of the only clue she had to Emily's fate. As they ran, Clara's mind raced. Who were these people? Why had they attacked? And most importantly, what connection did they have to Emily and to Lila? Every step deeper into the woods felt like plunging further into madness, yet she knew turning back wasn't an option. Not when the truth lay just beyond reach. Meanwhile, miles away, Lila paced frantically in her apartment, her phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. She ignored it, knowing full well who was calling: Clara. Guilt weighed heavily on her shoulders, pressing down until it felt like she might collapse under its burden. She should have told Clara everything years ago, but fear had kept her silent. Fear of judgment, fear of consequences, fear of losing the only family she had left. But now, with Clara seemingly unraveling secrets Lila had worked so hard to bury, the walls were closing in. She couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, Clara would find her, and when she did, Lila knew she wouldn't be able to hide behind lies anymore. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, she froze, her heart pounding wildly. No one ever visited her, unannounced. Slowly, cautiously, she approached the door and peered through the people. Standing outside was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a grim expression. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice wavering. "I'm here to help," the man replied, his tone calm but firm. "Open the door. Lila, you're in danger." Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to see him fully. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, she considered slamming the door shut and calling the police. But something in his demeanor, his quiet authority, his unwavering focus, made her pause. "What kind of danger?" she asked warily. "The kind that follows you wherever you go," he said cryptically. "The kind that knows your secrets." Lila swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the edge of the doorframe. "How do you know about that?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, holding it up for her to see. It was a picture of Emily, taken shortly before her disappearance. Beneath her smiling face, someone had scrawled 2 words in red ink: "Still alive." Lila's knees buckled, and she staggered backward, collapsing onto the couch. Tears streamed down her face as memories flooded back. Memories she'd tried so desperately to forget. Memories of the night Emily vanished, of the choices she'd made, of the promises she'd broken. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because time is running out," the man said gravely. "And if you want to save her, you'll need to start talking. Everything. Now." Back in the forest, Clara and Ellis finally managed to lose their pursuers, collapsing breathlessly behind a cluster of boulders. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, but neither cared. Survival had become their sole focus. Clara opened the journal again, flipping through the pages feverishly. One entry stood out, written in bold capital letters: "The Watcher is always near. He knows everything. Trust no one." Beneath it, a crude sketch depicted a shadowy figure perched atop a hill, watching unseen as events unfolded below. Clara shivered, recalling the message she'd received earlier: "Beware the Watcher." Whoever or whatever the Watcher was, it seemed to be central to the mystery surrounding Emily's disappearance. Ellis noticed her unease and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. "But we need to stay sharp. These people, they're dangerous." Clara nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Dangerous didn't begin to describe what they were dealing with. As they prepared to move again, a new question surfaced in her mind. Was Lila part of the group hunting them? Or was she also a victim, caught in a web of secrets and lies? Before they could decide their next move, Clara's phone buzzed once more. Reluctantly, she pulled it out and checked the screen. The message read, "Turn back while you still can. The truth will destroy you." She stared at the words, her resolve wavering. Destroy her. How could the truth be worse than the uncertainty, the endless questions that had haunted her for years? Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was sending these messages knew far more than they let on. Ellis noticed her hesitation and leaned closer. "What does it say?" Clara hesitated before showing him the message. Do you think they're right about the truth destroying me?" Ellis studied her face carefully, weighing his response. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we need to hear," he said finally. "But running won't change anything. If you want answers, we have to keep going." Clara nodded slowly, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. They rose to their feet, adjusting their backpacks and gripping their flashlights tightly. The map indicated the second location was nearby, a crumbling church on the outskirts of town. According to the notes scribbled beside it, the church had been abandoned for decades, its history steeped in rumors of occult rituals and disappearances. As they set off once more, Clara couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Glancing over her shoulder, she scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing, but the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. Unbeknownst to her, a pair of glowing eyes observed them from the shadows, following their every move. The Watcher was indeed near, biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the time they reached the church, dawn was beginning to break, casting pale golden light across the horizon. The structure itself was decrepit, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. Ivy crept up the stone walls, choking the windows and doors, while weeds sprouted unchecked from cracks in the foundation. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a place where hope went to die. Clara pushed open the heavy wooden door, wincing as it creaked loudly on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of incense, long since burned away. Rows of pews lined the nave, leading up to an altar draped in black cloth. Candles sat unlit on either side, their wax melted and hardened into grotesque shapes resembling twisted limbs. Ellis led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. As they explored the space, they discovered strange symbols painted on the walls in faded red paint. Clara recognized them instantly. They matched the ones carved into the oak tree at the crossroads. Whatever ritual had taken place here, it was connected to the events surrounding Emily's disappearance. In the corner of the room, hidden partially behind a toppled pew, they found a small wooden box, similar to the one they'd uncovered earlier. Inside was a single item, a key engraved with the same symbols as the map. Clara turned it over in her hands, examining it closely. It looked old, almost ancient, its metal tarnished with age. "This must unlock something," Ellis muttered, scanning the room for potential clues. His gaze landed on a trapdoor embedded in the floor near the altar. Approaching it cautiously, he knelt down and examined the lock. Sure enough, the key fit perfectly. With a soft click, the trapdoor swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Clara hesitated, peering into the abyss below. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Ellis offered her a grim smile. "No, but we've come this far. Let's finish it." Taking a deep breath, Clara descended. The stairs first, her flashlight illuminating the cramped passageway. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with books, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and bundles of herbs tied with string. It was clear someone had used this space for rituals or experiments. At the end of the corridor, they found another door, this one reinforced with iron bars. Using the key again, they unlocked it and stepped inside. What greeted them was unlike anything they'd encountered so far. The room was dominated by a large circular table covered in maps, charts, and photographs. In the center lay a ledger bound in black leather, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting, detailing names, dates, and locations. Among them, Clara spotted her own name and Emily's, but it was the wall opposite the table that drew their attention. Covered floor to ceiling in newspaper clippings, Polaroids, and handwritten notes, it formed a chaotic collage chronicling disappearances dating back decades. Each victim was marked with a red X, except for one, Emily Harper. Beside her photo, someone had scrawled 3 chilling words, "Not yet gone." Clara's knees buckled and she sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about Emily, it was about something far larger, far darker. A conspiracy spanning generations, targeting individuals for reasons unknown. Ellis helped her to her feet, his expression grim. "We need to get this information to the authorities," he said urgently. "Whatever this is, it's bigger than just your sister." Before they could act, however, a loud crash echoed from above. Footsteps thundered overhead, accompanied by shouts and the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. They weren't alone anymore. Clara clutched the ledger tightly, her mind racing. Whoever was upstairs knew they were here, and they weren't going to let them leave alive. The sound of footsteps pounding above them sent a jolt of panic through Clara's body. She tightened her grip on the ledger, its worn leather pressing into her palms, as if anchoring her to reality. Ellis moved quickly, positioning himself near the doorway and drawing his gun once more. His eyes darted between the narrow passageway, leading back upstairs and the cluttered room they were trapped in. "We don't have much time," he whispered urgently. "Whoever's up there knows we're here." Clara nodded, though her mind was racing too fast for coherent thought. The wall of clippings and notes loomed over her like an accusation. A labyrinth of secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to unravel. But one thing was clear, Emily's name stood out among the others, marked not with a red X, but with those haunting words, "Not yet gone." It was both a lifeline and a riddle, offering hope while deepening the mystery. She glanced at the ledger in her hands, then back at the chaotic collage on the wall. "We can't leave without this," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is proof. Proof that Emily might still be alive, and proof that someone's been covering it all up." Ellis hesitated, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right, but every instinct screamed at him to get her out of harm's way. This wasn't just a dangerous situation, it was a deadly one. Still, he couldn't deny the weight of what they'd uncovered. The conspiracy stretched far beyond anything he'd imagined during his years investigating Emily's disappearance. If they could expose it, they might finally bring justice to the victims and answers to their families. "All right," he conceded grimly. "But we do this my way. No heroics, Clara. We get what we need and get out before they find us." Before either of them could move further, a loud bang echoed from above, a door slamming shut. Then came muffled voices, sharp and urgent, followed by the unmistakable scrape of furniture being moved across the floor. They were searching for them. Clara stuffed the ledger into her backpack, her movements frantic but deliberate. She scanned the room one last time, looking for anything else that might help. Her flashlight beam landed on a small wooden chest tucked beneath the table. Kneeling down, she pried it open and found another journal inside, smaller and more fragile than the previous ones. Its pages were brittle with age, some crumbling at the edges. Flipping through it quickly, she realized it contained entries written in multiple handwriting styles. Each entry dated differently, but all referencing the same thing: the offering. "What is this?" Ellis asked, kneeling beside her. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her voice trembling. "But whatever it is, it's connected to everything else. We can't leave it behind." He nodded curtly and helped her secure the journal in her bag. Together, they crept toward the passageway, listening intently for any sign of movement above. The footsteps had grown quieter, almost methodical now, as if whoever or whatever was hunting them had shifted tactics. Were they trying to flush them out or lure them into a trap? As they reached the base of the staircase, Clara froze. A faint scraping noise came from directly above, the sound of boots. Descending slowly, deliberately. Someone was coming down. Ellis raised his gun, motioning for Clara to stay behind him. She obeyed, clutching the strap of her backpack tightly as adrenaline surged through her veins. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to bolt or fight depending on what happened next. The figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the dim light, filtering in from the church above. For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, the figure spoke. "Clara?" Her breath hitched. That voice, it was familiar, too familiar. "Lila?" she gasped, stepping forward despite Ellis's warning hand on her arm. Sure enough, Lila Monroe emerged from the shadows, her face pale and drawn. She looked terrified, her eyes darting wildly around the room, as if expecting an attack at any moment. In her hands, she clutched a small satchel that bulged with papers and photographs. "What are you doing here?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking with anger and confusion. "How did you even know where to find me?" Lila swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "I've been following you since you got back to the house," she confessed. "I didn't want to believe you'd actually come here, to the crossroads, to the church, but when I saw your car parked outside, I knew I had to stop you." "Stop me? From what?" Clara snapped, advancing toward her friend. "From finding out the truth about Emily? About you?" Lila flinched, guilt etched across her features. "It's not what you think," she pleaded. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I tried to protect her, I swear I did. But they wouldn't let me." "Who are they?" Ellis interjected sharply, his gun still trained on Lila. "And why should we trust anything you say?" Lila hesitated, glancing nervously at the staircase behind her. "There's no time to explain," she said urgently. "They're coming. You have to listen to me if you want to survive." Clara stared at her, torn between rage and desperation. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand answers right then and there. But another part, the part that remembered how fiercely loyal Lila had always been, told her to wait, to hear her out. "Talk," Clara commanded coldly. "Start talking and don't leave anything out." Lila nodded shakily and began speaking in a rush, her words tumbling over each other. 10 years ago, Emily found out about something big. There's a group, a secret society that's been operating in Salem for centuries. They call themselves the Keepers. They choose people, specific individuals, and make them disappear. Not kill them exactly, more like harvest them. For rituals, sacrifices, experiments, I don't even know the full extent of it. But Emily figured it out. She started asking questions, digging deeper than she should have. And when they realized what she knew, she trailed off, choking back a sob. Clara grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to meet her gaze. "What happened to her, Lila? Tell me." "They took her," Lila whispered, her voice breaking. "On Halloween night they came for her. I tried to stop them, I really did. But they threatened me. Told me if I interfered, they'd take me too. So I stayed quiet. I let them take her, and I've hated myself for it ever since." Ellis stepped closer, his expression grim. "Why didn't you go to the police? Why keep this hidden for so long?" "Because they're everywhere," Lila exclaimed, her voice rising hysterically. "You don't understand. They have connections, resources. Anyone who tries to expose them ends up disappearing themselves. I was scared, okay? Scared for my life. Scared for Clara's life." Clara released her grip on Lila, taking a step back as the weight of her confession sank in. Betrayal burned hot in her chest, mingling with sorrow and disbelief. How could Lila have kept this from her? How could she have lived with herself all these years? But before she could process her emotions fully, a shout from above shattered the tense silence. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and three figures dressed in dark robes burst into the room, their faces obscured by hoods. Each carried a lantern glowing with sickly green light, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. "Enough," one of them growled, raising a dagger menacingly. "You've meddled long enough." Ellis fired a shot, the bullet grazing the leader's arm and causing him to stumble backward. Chaos erupted as the robed figures lunged forward, forcing Clara, Lila, and Ellis to scramble for cover. Clara ducked behind the table, clutching her backpack tightly as shouts and scuffles filled the confined space. Ellis exchanged fire with the attackers, his movements precise and calculated despite the chaos. "Get out of here," he yelled at Clara and Lila. "Now!" Clara hesitated, torn between fleeing and staying to help. But Lila grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the passageway. "We have to go," she urged. "Trust me, please." Reluctantly, Clara followed, her heart pounding as they climbed the stairs two at a time. Behind them, the sounds of struggle grew louder, punctuated by the occasional gunshot. She prayed silently that Ellis would be okay, that he'd somehow managed to hold them off long enough for her and Lila to escape. Reaching the main sanctuary of the church, they pushed open the heavy wooden door and stumbled outside into the early morning light. The air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness they'd just escaped, but their relief was short-lived. Standing a few yards away, partially concealed by trees, was a man watching them intently. His presence was unnerving, not because he seemed threatening, but because he radiated an aura of detached observation, as if he were cataloging their every move. When he noticed Clara staring at him, he tilted his head slightly and smiled. A cold, calculating smile that sent chills down her spine. "The Watcher," Lila breathed, her voice barely audible. "He's here." Clara's blood ran cold. The messages, the warnings, they hadn't been idle threats. Whoever this man was, he was connected to everything. And now, he was watching them. Without another word, Lila tugged Clara toward the tree line, urging her to run. They darted into the forest, weaving between trunks and leaping over roots, as the man remained rooted in place, his gaze following them unblinkingly. Clara glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, half expecting him to give chase. But he didn't move. Instead, he simply stood there, his eerie smile lingering like a scar. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs ached, finally collapsing in a clearing far from the church. Clara slumped against a tree, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Her mind raced with questions, fears, and fragments of the story Lila had told. None of it made complete sense, but one thing was painfully clear. Emily was still alive, or at least she had been taken for a reason, and uncovering the truth would require confronting forces far beyond anything they'd faced so far. Lila sat beside her, her face pale and streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice trembling. "For everything. For lying. For keeping secrets. I didn't know what else to do." Clara didn't respond immediately. She stared at her friend, seeing her in a new light, not just as the girl who'd shared countless memories with her growing up, but as someone complicit in the nightmare that had consumed their lives. Forgiveness felt impossibly distant. Yet, she couldn't deny the pain and regret etched into Lila's expression. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "If we're going to fix this, if we're going to save Emily, you need to tell me everything. No more lies, no more omissions, do you understand?" Lila nodded solemnly. "I'll tell you everything I know. But first," she paused, pulling something from her satchel. It was a photograph, faded and creased with age. In it, Emily stood smiling, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, in what appeared to be a ceremonial setting. Beneath the image, someone had scrawled a single phrase: "The third night will reveal all." Clara stared at the photo, her pulse quickening. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. It means we're running out of time, Lila replied gravely. Halloween is only 2 days away. Whatever happens next, it's going to happen then, at the final location. Clara turned the map over in her hands, tracing the route to the third and final destination, an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. According to the notes scribbled beside it, the asylum had been closed decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. Rumors claimed it was haunted, cursed, or worse. But Clara knew better now. This wasn't about ghosts or superstition. It was about power, control, and the lengths people would go to maintain both. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Clara cast one last glance back toward the direction they'd come from. Somewhere in the distance, the church loomed silently, its secrets buried but not forgotten. And somewhere within those secrets lay the key to finding Emily and perhaps to reclaiming the family she'd lost. But as they set off once more, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The watcher's smile lingered in her mind, a reminder that eyes unseen continued to follow their every move. Whatever awaited them at the asylum, it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be safe. Yet, for the first time in years, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Hope that Emily was still alive, hope that the truth could set them free, and hope that together they might stand a chance against the darkness closing in around them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense forest, as Clara and Lila trudged along the narrow dirt path leading toward the abandoned asylum. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every sound, the crunch of twigs underfoot, the rustle of branches swaying in the wind, felt amplified, pressing against their nerves like an invisible weight. Clara clutched the map tightly in one hand, her other gripping a flashlight that flickered intermittently despite fresh batteries. Her backpack dug into her shoulders, its contents heavy with journals, photographs, and the ledger they had risked so much to retrieve. Each item felt like a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. Yet the closer they got to the asylum, the more fragmented the picture seemed to become. Lila walked beside her, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously between the trees. She hadn't spoken much since their escape from the church, but her silence spoke volumes. Guilt radiated off her in waves, mingling with fear and regret. Clara wanted to hate her, to blame her for everything, but the anger was tempered by something deeper, pity. Lila wasn't just complicit, she was trapped, caught in a web of secrets and threats too vast for either of them to fully comprehend. As they approached the clearing where the asylum loomed, Clara stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. The building stood before them like a monolith of despair, its crumbling walls covered in ivy and graffiti. Broken windows stared blankly into the void, while jagged shards of glass glinted ominously in the fading light. A wrought-iron gate hung crookedly on rusted hinges, its bars twisted into shapes that resembled claw marks. "This is it," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The final location." Clara nodded, steeling herself for what lay ahead. According to the map, the asylum was tied to the third Halloween night, a date marked ominously with the words "Revelation." Whatever awaited them inside, it promised answers, but also danger. She glanced at Lila, whose hands trembled visibly, as she adjusted the strap of her satchel. "We need to stick together," Clara said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "No matter what happens." Lila met her gaze hesitantly, then nodded. "Okay, together." Pushing open the gate, they stepped onto the grounds, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of moss covering the cracked pavement. As they drew closer to the entrance, Clara noticed something etched into the stone archway above the door, symbols identical to those carved into the oak tree at the crossroads and painted on the walls of the hidden chamber beneath the church. They pulsed faintly in the twilight, glowing with an eerie luminescence that made her skin crawl. Before they could enter, a sudden movement caught Clara's eye. She turned sharply, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. At first she saw nothing, just the skeletal outlines of trees swaying gently in the breeze. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was him, the Watcher. He stood motionless, his presence unnerving in its stillness. His face remained obscured by the brim of his hat, but his piercing gaze locked onto Clara with unsettling intensity. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched, as if waiting for something. Clara's heart pounded wildly in her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound brave. "What do you want?" The Watcher tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. For a moment, she thought he might ignore her. Then, without warning, he raised a gloved hand and pointed toward the asylum. It wasn't a gesture of aggression or threat, it was a directive, as if urging her forward. "What does that mean?" Lila asked nervously, clutching Clara's arm. "Is he helping us or luring us into a trap?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, lowering her flashlight. "But we don't have a choice. We have to go in." With one last glance at the Watcher, who remained rooted to the spot, they pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The interior of the asylum was even more foreboding than the exterior. Dust coated every surface, swirling lazily. In the beams of their flashlights, the air smelled stale and metallic, carrying hints of decay that made Clara's stomach churn. Rows of rusted gurneys lined the hallways, their mattresses stained with dark splotches that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it crude drawings, others cryptic messages scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They're watching. Run while you can. Not all who vanish are gone." Clara tried to focus on the task at hand, but the oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on her mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old structure settling, sent jolts of paranoia racing through her veins. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that unseen eyes were tracking their every move. "Where do we start?" Lila asked quietly, her voice echoing faintly in the cavernous space. Clara unfolded the map again, tracing the route with her finger. According to the notes scribbled beside the asylum, the key to unlocking the mystery lay in the basement, a place referred to ominously as the Chamber. She swallowed hard, recalling the horrors they'd encountered in the hidden room beneath. The church. If this chamber was anything like that, they were walking straight into a nightmare. "There's a staircase near the east wing," she said finally, pointing down the hallway. "We'll head there first." They moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. The farther they ventured into the asylum, the more dilapidated it became. Doors hung off their hinges, revealing rooms filled with overturned furniture and shattered glass. In one room, they found a collection of patient files scattered across the floor, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. Clara picked up one of the folders, skimming through its contents. Most of the entries were redacted, black ink blotting out names and details. But one phrase stood out, repeated multiple times. "Subject exhibits unusual resilience to termination protocols." Her stomach churned. Termination protocols? What kind of experiments had taken place here? Before she could dwell on it further, a loud crash echoed through the hallway. Both women froze, their flashlights swinging toward the source of the noise. Shadows danced erratically across the walls, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching rapidly. "Hide!" Clara hissed, grabbing Lila's arm and pulling her into a nearby room. They crouched behind an overturned desk, their breaths shallow as they listened intently. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the doorway. Several agonizing seconds, silence reigned. Then a low, guttural growl reverberated through the room, followed by the scrape of claws dragging across the floor. Whatever was out there wasn't human. Clara's grip tightened on her flashlight as she debated whether to shine it toward the doorway. Before she could decide, the creature lunged forward, its form silhouetted briefly in the dim light. It was massive, hunched and grotesque, its body twisted unnaturally, its limbs elongated and clawed. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, matching the lanterns carried by the robed figures they'd encountered earlier. Lila stifled a scream, her hand flying to her mouth. Clara acted instinctively, aiming her flashlight directly at the creature and blinding it momentarily. It recoiled with a shriek, giving them just enough time to bolt from the room and sprint down the hallway. "They're here!" Lila panted as they rounded a corner. "The keepers! They must have followed us!" Clara didn't respond. Her mind raced as they ran, searching for any sign of the staircase leading to the basement. Finally, they spotted it, a narrow flight of steps descending into pitch-black darkness. Without hesitation, they plunged downward, their footfalls echoing loudly in the confined space. At the bottom, they found themselves in a labyrinthine network of tunnels, each passageway branching off in different directions. Clara consulted the map again, trying to orient herself. One tunnel stood out, marked with the same symbols they'd seen throughout their journey. This had to be the way to the chamber. As they ventured deeper, the temperature dropped dramatically, their breaths forming visible clouds in the freezing air. The walls were lined with cells, their barred doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Inside, remnants of past occupants remained. Chains rusted with age, scraps of clothing, and bones that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. Finally, they reached a massive iron door at the end of the tunnel. It bore intricate carvings similar to the ones on the ledger and journals they'd collected. At its center was a keyhole shaped like the symbols they'd been following. Clara pulled out the ancient key they'd found in the church and inserted it into the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, they found a circular room dominated by a large stone altar. Surrounding it were shelves stacked high with artifacts, jars containing unidentifiable substances, ritualistic tools, and bundles of herbs tied with string. On the far wall, a projection screen displayed grainy footage of people being led into the asylum, their faces blurred but their terror palpable. Beneath the screen, a control panel blinked with red lights, indicating it was still operational. Clara approached the altar cautiously, her flashlight illuminating a leather-bound book resting atop it. She opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with meticulous handwriting detailing names, dates, and locations. Among them, she spotted Emily's name once more, this time accompanied by a photograph. It showed her sister standing in front of the asylum, her expression eerily calm, despite the chaos surrounding her. "She's alive," Clara breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "She has to be." Before Lila could respond, the door slammed, shut behind them, plunging the room into darkness. A single spotlight flickered on, illuminating the projection screen. The footage changed, showing a live feed of Emily seated in a chair, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear. Behind her stood a robed figure holding a dagger, its blade gleaming menacingly in the harsh light. A voice echoed through the chamber, distorted and mechanical. "You've come far, Clara, but your journey ends here." Clara spun around, searching for the source of the voice. "Show yourself!" she shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "Let her go!" The figure on the screen stepped forward, removing their hood to reveal Detective Mark Ellis. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his expression devoid of emotion. "I warned you to turn back," he said coldly, "but you wouldn't listen." "You," Clara gasped, disbelief and betrayal crashing over her like a tidal wave. "You're one of them." Ellis, or whoever he truly was, didn't answer. Instead, he raised the dagger, positioning it above Emily's chest. Clara lunged toward the screen, screaming, "No!" Suddenly, the Watcher appeared beside her, his presence startling but somehow calming. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. When he spoke, his voice was soft but commanding. "There is another way." Clara stared at him, hope flickering faintly in her chest. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the control panel, where a single button blinked invitingly. "The truth lies within, but choosing it will cost you everything." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. Whatever this button did, it represented their only chance to save Emily and expose the conspiracy. Once and for all, taking a deep breath, she pressed it. The room erupted in chaos. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and the screen went black. From somewhere above, explosions rocked the asylum, sending debris raining down around them. Clara shielded herself instinctively, praying they wouldn't be crushed. When the dust settled, the Watcher was gone. So was the footage of Emily. But in his place stood a figure she hadn't seen in 10 years. Her sister, alive and unharmed. "Emily," Clara choked out, rushing forward to embrace her. Emily hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered. "I never gave up hope." As they held each other, Lila approached cautiously, guilt etched across her features. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, "for everything." Emily released Clara and turned to Lila, her expression softening. "We all made mistakes," she said gently. "What matters now is that we fix this together." Clara nodded, determination burning in her eyes. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and dangers, but for the first time in years, she felt whole again. And armed with the truth, she knew they could take down the Keepers, once and for all. Outside, the asylum burned brightly against the night sky, its secrets consumed by flames. As they walked away hand in hand, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of closure, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of the conspiracy. Sometimes losing everything was the only way to find who you really are. And sometimes facing your sins was the first step toward redemption. The fire roared behind them, consuming the asylum in a blaze of orange and red. Clara, Emily, and Lila stumbled through the forest, their bodies bruised and exhausted, but their spirits buoyed by the weight of survival. The air smelled acrid with smoke, mingling with the dampness of the earth beneath their feet. Each step felt like a victory, a defiance against the forces that had sought to destroy them. Clara glanced back at the inferno one last time before focusing on the path ahead. Her mind raced with questions, fragments of revelations colliding. With raw emotion, they had escaped, but at what cost? Ellis's betrayal still stung sharply, leaving her grappling with conflicting feelings of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. He had been her anchor during so many dark nights, the man she trusted to uncover the truth about Emily's disappearance. And yet, he had been complicit in the very conspiracy they'd fought to dismantle. Emily walked silently beside her, her face pale but resolute. She hadn't spoken much since the chamber, choosing instead to cling to Clara as if afraid she might vanish again. Her eyes darted nervously around the forest, searching for any sign of pursuit. Though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, none of them could shake the feeling that they weren't truly free. Not yet. Lila brought up the rear, her steps hesitant and heavy with guilt. She kept glancing over her shoulder as though expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows. Clara didn't need to ask what was weighing on her mind. The haunted look in Lila's eyes said it all. Years of lies and complicity had taken their toll, and now, standing amidst the ruins of everything they'd uncovered, she seemed smaller somehow, like a shadow of the person she used to be. As they reached the edge of the forest, the first, rays of dawn began to break through the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It should have felt hopeful, a new beginning after a night of chaos. But Clara couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that this wasn't the end. It was merely a pause in an ongoing storm. They found temporary refuge in an abandoned cabin nestled deep within the woods. Its dilapidated structure offered little comfort, but it provided shelter from the elements and a chance to regroup. Inside, they huddled together around a small fire built in the hearth, its flickering light casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. For the first time since reuniting, Clara turned to Emily, her voice trembling with unspoken fears. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "After that night, where did they take you?" Emily hesitated, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as if trying to shield against memories too painful to confront. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't remember much about the abduction itself," she admitted. "Just flashes, hands grabbing me, voices chanting, the smell of incense choking the air. Then, darkness." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "When I woke up, I was in a cell. At first, I thought I was dreaming or dead. Everything was cold, sterile, like some kind of hospital. Except there were no doctors, no nurses, just guards dressed in those robes watching me constantly. They never explained why I was there or what they wanted. They just studied me." "Studied you?" Clara echoed, her stomach twisting with dread. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "They ran tests on me, blood work, scans, experiments I can't even describe. Sometimes they'd inject me with something that made my skin burn, my body feel like it was tearing apart. Other times, they'd lock me in rooms filled with mirrors, forcing me to stare at myself until I couldn't tell reality from hallucination. It was torture, Clara, psychological and physical." Clara reached out, pulling Emily into a tight embrace. Anger surged within her, hot and consuming. Whoever these people were, the Keepers, they weren't just criminals. They were monsters, and they would pay for what they'd done. "What about Ellis?" Lila interjected suddenly, her voice cracking under the strain of guilt. "How long has he been working with them?" Emily pulled away slightly, her expression grim. "He wasn't always part of it," she said quietly. "From what I gathered, he stumbled onto their operation while investigating my case. At first, I think he genuinely wanted to help, but when he realized how deep the conspiracy went, they gave him a choice: join them or disappear." Clara clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. "And he chose power over justice," she spat bitterly, "over family." "He's not the only one who made compromises," Lila muttered, her gaze fixed on the floor. "We all did, in different ways." The room fell silent, the weight of Lila's words hanging heavily in the air. Clara wanted to argue, to insist that nothing excused betrayal, but she couldn't deny the truth in Lila's confession. Betrayal came in many forms, some more overt than others. And forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't be easy. Hours later, as daylight fully illuminated the cabin, Clara spread the contents of their backpacks across the floor. The journals, photographs, and ledger formed a chaotic mosaic of secrets and clues. Together, they pored over each item, piecing together the puzzle bit by bit. One photograph caught Clara's attention, a grainy image of a group of people standing in front of the asylum decades ago. Their faces were blurred, obscured intentionally, but one figure stood out, a young woman wearing a pendant shaped like an eye. Beneath the photo, someone had scrawled a single phrase: "The eye sees all." "That symbol," Emily said suddenly, pointing to the pendant. "It's everywhere. On the artifacts we saw in the chamber, carved into the walls, painted on the maps. What does it mean?" "It's their emblem," Lila replied grimly. "The Keepers use it to mark their territory, their influence. It represents their belief that they're destined to control, to see and shape the world according to their will." Clara frowned, flipping through the pages of the ledger. Names jumped out at her, accompanied by dates and locations. Some entries were marked with Red X's, others with cryptic notes like subject terminated or resilience noted. But scattered among them were references to something called the offering. "What is this?" Clara murmured, tracing her finger along the phrase. "It keeps coming up, but I don't understand what it means." Lila shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Clara's gaze. "It's complicated," she hedged. "The offering is central to their rituals. Every Halloween, they select individuals, people they deem worthy, and use them in ceremonies meant to maintain their power. The victims aren't always killed outright. Sometimes they're transformed, altered in ways that defy explanation." Clara stared at her, horror dawning slowly. "You mean they experiment on them? Turn them into... what? Weapons?" "Not weapons," Lila corrected hesitantly. "More like conduits, vessels for their beliefs, their magic, whatever you want to call it. They think they're preserving balance, protecting humanity from forces beyond comprehension. But really they're just feeding their own greed." Emily shuddered visibly, pulling her knees closer to her chest. "That's what they were doing to me," she whispered, "trying to make me something else." A heavy silence settled over the room as the implications sank in. If the keepers viewed their victims as tools, then Emily's survival likely meant she hadn't fulfilled whatever role they'd intended for her. Which begged the question, why had they let her live? Before anyone could speculate further, a sharp knock at the door startled them. All three froze, hearts pounding wildly as they exchanged wary glances. Slowly, Clara rose to her feet, gripping a makeshift weapon, a piece of firewood, in trembling hands. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear. It coursing through her veins, the response came in a low, familiar voice. "It's me." Clara's breath hitched. Pushing open the door cautiously, she found herself face to face with Detective Mark Ellis. His appearance was haggard, his clothes singed and torn, his face streaked with soot. But his eyes, once cold and detached, now burned with desperation. "I know I don't deserve your trust," he began hoarsely, holding up his hands in surrender. "But I'm here to help, to make things right." Clara stepped aside reluctantly, allowing him to enter. Emily recoiled instinctively, pressing herself against the wall as far from him as possible. Lila remained silent, her expression unreadable. "You betrayed us," Clara accused, her voice laced with venom. "You lied to me for years. Why should we believe anything you say now?" Ellis sighed heavily, lowering himself onto a chair near the fire. "Because I've seen what they're capable of," he admitted, "and because I've realized I can't fight them alone. None of us can." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded document. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed a detailed map of Salem, marked with symbols identical to those they'd encountered throughout their journey. At its center was a location labeled simply, the Nexus. "This is where they converge," Ellis explained, his tone urgent. "Every year on Halloween, the leaders of the Keepers gather here to perform their most sacred ritual. This year, they plan to initiate something bigger than anything they've done before, something irreversible." "What do you mean?" Clara demanded, leaning forward. "They're going to summon something," Ellis continued grimly. "Something ancient, a force they believe will grant them ultimate power. But if they succeed, it won't stop at control. It'll consume everything and everyone in its path." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you know this?" "Because I helped them prepare for it," Ellis confessed, shame etched into his features. "Until I realized what they were planning. By then it was too late to back out without risking my life. So I stayed, biding my time, waiting for the right moment to act." "And now?" Lila asked skeptically. "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because I need your help," Ellis admitted, "and because I owe it to you, to all of you, to try and stop them." Clara studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. His remorse seemed genuine, his fear palpable. But trust was fragile, especially given everything they'd endured. Still, one thing was clear: whether they believed him or not, they couldn't afford to ignore the threat he described. "If we do this," Clara said finally, her voice firm, "you follow our lead. No secrets, no lies. Understand?" Ellis nodded solemnly. Understood. With renewed purpose, they devised a plan. Using the map and information provided by Ellis, they identified key locations tied to the Keeper's operations: safe houses, supply depots, and gathering points leading up to the ritual. Their goal was simple but perilous: disrupt the ceremony before it could begin. As night fell once more, they set out toward the first target, moving stealthily through the shadows. The streets of Salem were eerily quiet, the townsfolk unaware of the danger lurking beneath their feet. Torches flickered in doorways, casting ghostly glows across cobblestone paths. Halloween decorations swayed gently in the breeze, their cheerful designs mocking the terror unfolding behind closed doors. Their first objective was a warehouse on the outskirts of town, rumored to house supplies for the upcoming ritual. Armed with rudimentary weapons and sheer determination, they infiltrated the building, taking down guards stationed inside with surprising efficiency. Clara moved with precision, her movements fueled by rage and resolve. Beside her, Emily proved unexpectedly resourceful, using her knowledge of the Keeper's tactics to anticipate their every move. By the time they emerged, the warehouse was engulfed in flames, its contents reduced to ash. Victory tasted bitter, but fleeting. They knew the Keepers wouldn't take kindly to such defiance, and indeed, retaliation came swiftly. As they regrouped in a secluded alleyway, a fleet of black vans screeched to a halt nearby, disgorging robed figures armed with lanterns and daggers. The Watcher appeared momentarily, his presence both warning and reassurance, before disappearing into the night. "We need to keep moving," Clara urged, her voice taut with urgency. "They'll be hunting us now." Fighting their way through ambush after ambush, they pressed onward, each encounter bringing them closer to the heart of the conspiracy and closer to the truth. Along the way, old wounds began to heal, tentative bonds forming between unlikely allies. Even Lila found redemption in action, proving herself willing to risk everything to protect those she loved. Finally, as midnight approached, they reached the Nexus, a sprawling estate hidden deep within the woods. Its gates loomed ominously, flanked by statues resembling twisted humanoid figures. Beyond them lay a labyrinth of gardens, fountains, and pathways leading to a grand hall illuminated by flickering torchlight. Inside, the air hummed with energy, charged with anticipation. Robed figures gathered in concentric circles around a massive stone altar, their chants rising in eerie harmony. At the center stood a cloaked figure, their identity obscured by layers of fabric and shadow. Before them lay a bound victim, their face obscured by a mask. Clara signaled for the others to stay hidden as she crept closer, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Recognition struck her like a lightning bolt. The victim was none other than the Watcher. "No," she whispered, horrified. "They're using him!" Without hesitation, she sprang into action, charging into the fray with a primal scream. Chaos erupted as her companions followed suit, weapons clashing against daggers, shouts drowning out the chants. The Keepers fought fiercely, their numbers overwhelming, but their resolve faltering under the onslaught. In the midst of the battle, Clara confronted the leader, tearing back their hood to reveal a face she recognized instantly. The woman from the photograph, the one wearing the eye-shaped pendant. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as she raised a dagger aimed squarely at Clara's heart. "You can't stop destiny," the woman intoned, her voice echoing unnaturally. "The offering must be completed." Clara hesitated, torn between fear and fury. Then, drawing strength from the love and loyalty surrounding her, she lunged forward, knocking the dagger from the woman's grasp. With a final, desperate effort, she plunged it into the ground, severing the connection fueling the ritual. The hall trembled violently as the energy dissipated, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. One by one, the keepers collapsed, their power shattered. As the dust settled, Clara turned to find Emily, Lila, and Ellis standing beside her, battered but alive. It was over. The conspiracy had fallen, its leaders defeated. But as they gazed at the destruction around them, they knew the scars would linger. For themselves, for Salem, and for the countless lives touched by the Keeper's reign of terror. Yet amidst the wreckage, hope flickered faintly. For the first time in years, they were free, not just from the conspiracy, but from the chains of guilt, betrayal, and fear that had bound them for so long. And together, they vowed to rebuild, not just their lives, but the future they had fought so hard to protect. The grand hall lay in ruins, its once imposing structure reduced to rubble. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Clara stood amidst the chaos, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Her hands were smeared with dirt and ash, her clothes torn and singed. Yet despite the physical toll, she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. For the first time since Emily's disappearance, there was clarity. The Keeper's grip on Salem had been severed, their power dismantled. Around her, the others gathered, equally battered but alive. Emily clung to Clara's side, her eyes wide with disbelief as she surveyed the destruction they had wrought. Lila knelt nearby, her face streaked with tears, her satchel discarded beside her. Even Ellis looked smaller somehow, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a haunted vulnerability. They were all broken, but together they had survived. Clara turned to face them, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It's over," she said simply. "They can't hurt anyone else." No one responded immediately. The weight of what they'd accomplished and sacrificed was too immense to process in words. Instead, they exchanged glances, silent acknowledgements passing between them like unspoken vows. Whatever bonds had fractured over the years were slowly mending, forged anew in the crucible of shared trauma. As dawn broke over Salem, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they emerged from the estate and into the quiet streets of the town. The townsfolk stirred sleepily in their homes, unaware of the cataclysm that had unfolded mere hours earlier. To them, it was just another day, a continuation of life uninterrupted by the horrors lurking beneath the surface. But for Clara and her companions, everything had changed. They made their way to an abandoned church on the edge of town, seeking refuge and time to regroup. Inside, the stained glass windows cast fragmented colors across the dusty pews, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. It felt fitting, a sacred space where wounds could begin to heal. Emily sat near the altar, her knees drawn up to her chest. She stared at the sunlight streaming through the windows, her expression distant. When Clara approached, she didn't look up immediately. Instead, she spoke softly, her voice tinged with both wonder and sorrow. "I don't know who I am anymore," Emily admitted. "After everything they did to me, after everything I endured, I feel like I'm not whole, like pieces of me are missing." Clara sank onto the pew beside her, wrapping an arm around her sister's shoulders. "You're still you," she said firmly, "stronger than ever. What they tried to take from you, they failed. You survived. That makes you unstoppable." Emily managed a faint smile, leaning into Clara's embrace. "I couldn't have done it without you," she murmured. "Without all of you." Lila joined them moments later, hesitating before lowering herself onto the pew opposite them. Her guilt was palpable, radiating off her in waves. "I owe you both so much," she began haltingly. "For years, I let fear dictate my choices. I betrayed your trust, Clara, and I abandoned you, Emily. I don't expect forgiveness, not yet, but I want to make things right, starting now." Clara studied her friend, seeing not just the woman who had kept secrets, but also the girl who had once been her confidant, her rock. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but perhaps it could grow over time. "We'll get through this together," she said finally, "but it starts with honesty. No more lies, no more running." Lila nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I promise." Ellis lingered near the entrance, his presence uncertain. He seemed out of place among them, a reminder of betrayal and complicity. Yet, when he finally approached, his steps were deliberate, his expression penitent. "I won't ask for absolution," he said quietly. "Not after everything I've done, but I need you to know I'm done hiding, done lying. If there's any way I can help rebuild, if there's any chance to earn back even a fraction of your trust." Clara met his gaze, searching for sincerity. His remorse was evident, raw and unfiltered. Whether or not she could forgive him fully remained to be seen, but she recognized the spark of redemption within him. "Start by telling us everything," she instructed. "Every name, every location, every secret you know about the Keepers. Leave nothing out." Ellis nodded solemnly. "Done." Over the next several days, they pieced together the full scope of the conspiracy. Using the documents recovered from the Nexus, along with Ellis's knowledge, they compiled a comprehensive dossier detailing the Keepers' operations, their rituals, their victims, their network of influence spanning decades. It was a staggering revelation, exposing corruption that reached into law enforcement, government, and even religious institutions. With the evidence in hand, they decided to release it to the public. Anonymously, they uploaded the files to secure servers, ensuring the information would spread far beyond Salem. Journalists and investigators picked up the story quickly, uncovering layers of deceit that shocked the nation. Arrests followed swiftly. High-profile figures implicated in the scandal brought down in a cascade of indictments. Yet, while justice unfolded publicly, privately, they grappled with the aftermath. Each of them bore scars, physical, emotional, psychological, that would take time to heal. Some nights, Clara woke screaming, haunted by memories of the asylum and the battles fought within its walls. Other times, she found solace in Emily's presence, their bond stronger than ever, despite the trials they'd faced. One evening, as they sat together in the church, Emily pulled out a small, leather-bound journal she'd salvaged from the wreckage of the Nexus. Its pages were filled with sketches, notes, and fragments of poetry written by past victims of the Keepers. As she flipped through it, she paused on a particular entry, reading aloud. "Even in darkness, light persists. A single flame can ignite a revolution. Do not mourn what is lost. Celebrate what remains." Clara smiled faintly, recognizing the sentiment. "That's how we move forward," she said softly, "by holding on to hope, by remembering those who didn't survive, and honoring their memory by living fully." Lila nodded, clutching the pendant she'd taken from the leader of the Keepers. She had considered destroying it, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was a reminder, a symbol of the darkness they had overcome and the resilience required to endure. "We've lost so much," she acknowledged. "But maybe losing everything is what gives us the strength to start again." Ellis stood by the doorway, watching them silently. Though he still carried the burden of his actions, he seemed lighter somehow, as though shedding the weight of secrecy had freed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "You've given me a second chance," he said eventually, "and I intend to use it wisely." Clara glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. "We'll see," she replied. "Actions speak louder than words." Weeks passed, and Salem began to recover. The town rallied around the survivors, offering support and solidarity. Memorials were erected for those lost to the Keeper's cruelty, their names etched into stone as reminders of lives stolen too soon. Among them was a plaque dedicated to the Watcher, whose ultimate sacrifice had ensured the ritual's failure. Clara visited it often, leaving flowers and lighting candles in gratitude. In time, the group disbanded, each member forging their own path forward. Emily enrolled in art school, channeling her experiences into creative expression. Her paintings, vivid, haunting and deeply personal, garnered attention, becoming symbols of resilience and healing. Lila returned to activism, dedicating herself to exposing other hidden conspiracies and advocating for victims' rights. Even Ellis found purpose, working with law enforcement agencies to dismantle similar organizations operating in secret. For Clara, she chose to stay in Salem, rebuilding her life brick by brick. She opened a small cafe downtown, naming it The Crossroads. It became a haven for the community, a place where people gathered to share stories, laughter, and hope. On the wall above the counter hung a framed photograph of her, Emily, Lila, and Ellis, taken shortly after the final battle. Beneath it, a quote read, "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are." Years later, Clara sat alone in the cafe late one night, nursing a cup of coffee as rain pattered against the windows. The town was quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional car passing by. She reflected on how far they'd come, from despair to defiance, from betrayal to unity. The journey had been painful, messy, and fraught with loss, but it had also been transformative. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. A text message appeared on the screen. "Thank you for saving me, for saving us all. Love always, Emily." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride and love. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger because of it. And though the scars would never fully fade, they served as reminders, not of pain, but of survival, of triumph. Outside, the rain eased, giving way to a starry sky. Clara stepped outside, gazing upward as constellations twinkled brightly against the velvet expanse. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn awaited, promising new beginnings and endless possibilities. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. Then, turning back toward the cafe, she smiled. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was theirs. And that was enough. The end.